Okay, here we go. Alright. Sources of error. So the first source of error we're going to talk about is one that actually came up on the very first day when I conducted my survey and I asked you guys questions. One of the big problems is you can ask people questions, doesn't mean they're going to answer. So there's a name for that in statistics. It's called either a self-selecting sample or it's called non-response. Two names for the same thing. So let me paint for you a couple of common scenarios where people conduct surveys and they encounter this problem. So here we go. An announcer on a radio station asks callers to call in and voice their opinion. Who's going to call in? Is everybody going to call in? No. Who's going to call in? Yeah. People who, Chastity? Okay. For one, people who listen to that station. And that's a different problem that we're actually going to come to in a couple minutes, but that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There you go. Okay. Only someone who cares really strongly is going to bother to call in to give their opinion. Now, this sort of dynamic actually creates what a lot of people say is a big problem with the political process. A lot of people say, well, politics is dominated by the extremists. You only hear from people all the way on the left wing and from people on the right wing. And what about all the moderates in the middle? Well, basically, this is the problem. Anytime someone says, well, what's your opinion on this? All the extremists who care deeply shout out, and they make sure that their voices are heard. The people who are moderate, who maybe have an opinion in the middle or are less let's say passionate, are less passionate or vocal about it, their opinions are not heard. So what winds up happening is that their interests, since they're not known, their interests are not taken care of. And the fundamental problem is that when trying to get the opinion of, say, the American public on any particular issue, there's a problem of non-response in terms of people getting their voice heard, getting their opinion heard. Something that I think some what is it? Oh, American Idol and all those like shows where you have to call in and vote for someone or something like that. I think when you text in, you have to pay for the texting. And what they used to have on the local news, there'd be like a question of the day, and they'd say call in and let us know what you think, but the call costs 50 cents. So who the heck is going to call in and pay 50 cents to register their opinion with, the local news? Only people who are crazy enough to think it's worth 50 cents to say what they think to an operator. Alright. So that poll is going to suffer from the problem of non-response or a self-selecting sample. It's not going to get the opinion of everybody. Okay. Here's another common case, a web poll. So who responds to a web poll? If you're surfing the web and something says, please take this survey, we'd like your opinion. If you're interested in the topic, so Bove said it's spam, so we just close it, right? Almost nobody answers these polls unless they care unless it just happens to be about something they care very deeply about. Okay, that's the first problem. The other problem is, who's not going to see this poll at all to begin with? People who don't use the internet. And this is a big problem, which we're going to talk about in 1 second. Okay. But another example where you have a problem of self-selecting sample or non-response. Customer service surveys. Who here works in retail or service or a restaurant or something like that? Okay, and sorry, what was your name? Kenny? Okay. So the place where you work, do they do things like customer service surveys to find out customer satisfaction? Okay. So how does that go? Okay. Is it like there's a card by the cashier or something? Okay. And what sorts of comments do you get? Really, you get good comments? What's more common? Do you get good comments or bad comments? Really? Wow. Okay. Well, that's actually, so I'm glad to hear it. You guys must be super, because it's most typical to get bad feedback. Is that your experience, or you just agree with that? Okay. So Madeleine is saying, from the point of view of the customer, when are you going to fill out a comment card? Typically when you've had a bad experience. You expect to have a good experience, not going to make the effort to say, yes, it was good, and drop it in the box. But typically you get so upset about a bad experience, you're like, I have to get my frustration out somewhere. Let me write a nasty comment, and let me put it in the box. So it's great that you guys do such a great job to get these positive comments, but typically with customer satisfaction surveys, it'll be like 90% say bad service. And does that really mean that 90% of your customers are getting bad service? No, absolutely not. It's just that the people who are getting good service don't make the effort to make their opinion heard. Okay. There's basically no point. Specifically because the way this survey is done, there's no way to avoid non-response or a self-selecting sample. So the next time, you have such a job, and the manager says, "Guys, we got terrible reviews in customer service." You say, "Well, the way you conducted the study was all wrong. You had the problem of a self-selecting sample, so the results aren't valid." Your manager will be so stunned they won't know what to say, and you're all set. Yeah, Chastity. Right, absolutely. And this is a very common thing that people do in order to overcome this problem. They're like, we want to get as many people to answer, so we're going to give stuff away. Right? Free cup of coffee, $5 to get your opinion, whatever. So it makes more people answer, but it still far and away does not get everyone to answer. So it's still a problem. Okay. So I hope everyone at this point understands what's a self-selecting sample, non-response, same thing. But something that came up, web poll. If you don't have internet access, you're not even going to see the web poll. Now, is this a problem? Why is this a problem? If I want the opinion of all U.S. citizens, but I do a web poll. What if I do a web poll about, do you think internet access is a good thing? Everybody, absolutely. Okay, so this brings us to the fundamental question of what is a bad sample? What is a good sample? What is a bad sample? So a bad sample is a sample which is not representative of the target population. So if I do a web poll, I'm only getting the opinion of people who have internet access. Is that representative of the entire US population? Absolutely not. In fact, it's bad for a number of reasons. If you want to look at the actual data, it's bad not just people who have internet access aren't just different because they have internet access. They're also different for a number. If you look at the data, people with internet access are different because they tend to be younger. So that's going to affect your results. And there are a number of other things as well. So this is something important. This is something that's very, very important when you get a sample, to make sure that the sample that you get is representative of your target population. Yeah.
But the way things are going nowadays, everybody's going to be having an internet on the cell phone, internet everywhere. So I mean, this generation now, when we get older, we're going to have internet as well.
Okay. So you've just written off everybody who's over 40 who doesn't have internet access. So no, but you know what? You're exactly right. If somebody wanted to do a survey of 18 to 34-year-olds, doing it digitally is probably a good method. But if you want to get the opinions of every U.S. citizen, you've also got to reach to everyone who does not have internet access. So you've got to be aware of what you're doing, and what population you're likely to get to reach. Okay. In fact, okay, there's a really, really famous historical example in the presidential election of 1948. I forget. It was a major newspaper. It might have been the Times. It was a major U.S. newspaper. They did a phone survey. They called up. It was some unbelievable number of people. It was like thousands, 10,000, something other people, and they said, "Who are you going to vote for in the election?" And overwhelmingly, people said Thomas Dewey. So, and they did this like the week of the election. So, or actually, I'm sorry, they did it, I think, like the day or two before the election. So, back then they were trying to make deadlines. So they came out with the early edition, said, "Dewey wins election." Anybody ever heard of President Dewey? No. You know who he was running against? Some guy named Harry Truman. Ever heard of President Truman? Yeah. So they got it wrong. Why did they get it wrong? Absolutely. This was the election of 1948. Who had telephones? Rich people. So by only using the phone to reach people for their survey, they were only asking rich people who they were going to vote for. So this is probably one of the most famous cases of getting a bad sample. And there's this really famous picture of the next day, Truman, after being elected president, standing there with the headline that says "Dewey elected president." Right. So the thing is, so you have to be very careful about how you reach your subjects. Okay. Next. So, is this question a good survey question to find out people's excuse me okay, to find out people's opinion of his leadership? John McCain's military experience makes him a good leader. Yes or no? So, who thinks this is a good question to ask? Okay. Who thinks this is not a good question to ask? Okay. So why not? Because, I'm sorry? Okay. And why does that make this a bad question? Okay. So if some people don't like John McCain, does that make this a bad question? Okay. Okay. Yes. So remind me your name again. Kelly. Okay. Okay. And that makes it a good. This makes it good or bad?
I think it makes it bad.
Okay.
One, this military experience can influence your leadership, but not necessarily. Like,
Okay.
it brings up, when you mention military experience, it brings up assumptions that it's sort of unfair to the ultimate goal that you're trying to get at.
Okay. And what are the assumptions?
Well, that, well, to have military experience, obviously you're patriotic. Being patriotic doesn't equate being a good leader. So
Okay.
people might not get past the patriotic aspect of the military experience. So it's sort of like using a stereotype to sort of confuse questions.
Okay.
Like,
So okay, so let me ask this. So this is actually headed in exactly the right direction. So do you think people's, in general, people's stereotype or assumptions about them?
anything bad about somebody who's in the military.
Okay, okay, that's good. Yeah, yeah,
So
definitely.
It's not like you would really say, oh, well, he's really bad at his job because he was in the military.
Right.
You don't, nobody
Right.
wants to get caught dead saying that.
So saying, so mentioning his military experience is going to do what to people's answers to this question?
Influence them to say that his experience, his military experience.
Influence them to make them say yes, that makes him a good leader. So first of all, I agree with that. Second of all, I would say that on average, people tend to associate military experience with being a good leader. I think I heard somebody say that. Would anybody agree or disagree with that? Okay. Yeah.
I disagree. I mean, if you look at like the military ranks and leadership, like you're either an officer or you're a brother. Like you either make the orders or you take the orders. So I don't know where John McCain falls into that. So that might not necessarily make him a good leader.
Okay. So let me say that your personal opinion aside, or your personal analysis aside, I should say, do you think that people, on average, associate military experience with being a good leader? I would say so. Okay. I could make it worse. I could say John McCain's honored military experience makes him a good leader. Or decorated, if you know what decorated means. Yeah. Okay. So I think if you put it like this, I think it becomes quite clear that the question is trying to get you to answer in one way. And that's called a loaded question. So now, fix it. How can we ask this question in a neutral way? If we want to ask a survey question to find out people's opinion of his leadership, we can ask, do you think John McCain is a good leader? There you go. Now it's neutral. Yes, but you still have extra stuff in there. So if you're trying to make it neutral, the idea is you get rid of all the extra stuff, and you just get right down to leader. Yeah, the point. Get to the point exactly. Okay. So does everybody get the game? All right. Good, because now everyone's going to play the game. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to get in groups of about 3 or 4 and work on this question. Abortion, the subject of abortion. Generally, the two sides on this controversial issue call themselves pro-choice and pro-life. So let's say we're going to do a survey. We want to find out, do a survey to find out where someone stands on the issue. I want you guys to design 3 questions. 1 question that is neutral, 1 question that is loaded towards pro-choice, and 1 question that is loaded towards pro-life. So, take a couple minutes and work on this. Okay, I'd like to hear what a couple different groups came up with. So, let's check it out. So, some different ideas. So, what did you guys are here? What did you guys come up with? Neutral question. Okay, great. Should abortion be illegal? Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Is abortion saving a life? That's loaded towards
Wait, is abortion saving a life?
Yeah.
I don't think I understand the question.
Like, do you consider getting an abortion saving a life? Because wouldn't that be like loaded towards, like the question that answers that question is saying no? Because most people say abortion is not saving a life. How organized things,
I'm not sure how anyone could interpret abortion as saving a life, so I'm not sure where that question is going. Okay. Okay. So you're trying to link it up with life and pro-life. Okay. So I think I see where you're going with that. I think there are clearer ways to phrase it so the bias is more clear. Let's go around. Okay. So chastity. Hey, there you go. Is it right? I wouldn't say is it right. I'll say should it be legal or should it be allowed? Just to make it a little more clear. Oh wait, wrong one. Pro-life. Illegal to kill an unborn child. Awesome. What are the key words there to make this a loaded question? Kill. There you go. And what else, which is a very important one? Unborn child. Right. That's an important phrase used by the pro-life side. Okay. And who can open up for me with a pro-choice one? Let's see. Okay. Yeah. How would you like the government to make your decisions for you? So does that have anything to do with abortion? Well, the way that you've written the question, does it have to do with abortion? Right. Okay. So we're not working on an advertising campaign for the pro-choice movement. What we're doing is we're trying to come up with a survey question that's loaded towards pro-choice. So obviously you're on the right track.
I mean, maybe for a survey, if you were to, if like that was in like maybe one of the last questions, and you could go
Yeah.
then it would be applicable, but I mean, just by itself.
That's a whole. Yeah. So what we actually talked about is we're talking about single loaded questions. There's obviously there's a way to make a loaded survey. You know, to ask a bunch of questions and then basically you have your payoff question at the end, where the first couple questions that you've asked are trying to bias in one direction. So you can certainly do that. But your idea of government involvement is definitely on the right track. But yeah, something else here. I'm sorry? Okay, shouldn't we have the right to choose our future by having an abortion? That's good. I'd like to clean it up a little bit, but that's like a good idea. Okay, pro-choice is hard. Okay, yeah.
Do you think that women should have the right to decide when they want to become mothers?
Hey, there you go. Should women have the right to decide when they become mothers? Clear and very clean. Okay. So now, what are the key aspects of this question that make it loaded in the pro-choice direction? Right, decide, woman, absolutely. Okay, and mother as well. So notice that one of the big distinctions is that the pro-choice question is phrased from the point of view of the woman, whereas the pro-life question is all centered around the perspective of the unborn child. And that's obvious. That's a major difference. In these questions also reflects the major difference in how the two sides think about this issue. Okay. So this is the longest we'll ever spend in this class parsing words, but it's important for you to spend a little time thinking about how that can affect your survey results or the results of any survey. I always want to take a minute to show you some of the greatest hits. So simple and neutral, basically the same as here, legal, illegal. Would you say you're pro-choice or pro-life? That's straightforward and neutral. Now let's get to some of the fun ones. The loaded ones are always so much fun. Okay. Should the government be allowed to take away a woman's constitutional right to choose whether she can have a child? That's loaded very nicely. Okay. Should the woman have the right to choose to end her pregnancy taken away by politicians? We hate politicians. Very loaded, obviously. Okay. And a nice, I think this is about the same. There you go. She won't be allowed to kill her baby before it's born. Okay. So, yeah. So you get the idea. Alright. And again, the point here is not to engage in some sort of policy debate, but notice that no matter what your opinion on the subject of abortion is, say you're pro-choice, it's really hard, if you look at the last question, to answer yes. And notice that even if you're pro-life, if you look at the next to last question, it's really hard, again, to answer yes. It's really hard to give the yes or no answer that agrees with your position based on the way the questions are phrased. That's a good loaded question. Okay. Let's see. So any questions about these things? Okay. Alright, really good group work, so let's get ready for the next thing. Alright, so we'll spend the rest of the time just going over a couple of other problems that you can have when you do some sort of study. A self-interest study. It's a self-interest study. It's a study conducted by someone who has an interest in the results turning out in a particular way. Obviously, when you do a study, you should be objective if you want to get results that reflect the real world. But this is not always the case. So, for example, you should be skeptical about a survey about GM cars that's been conducted by GM. Every car is number one? Really? Okay. And this actually hooks back into what we were just talking about. So, for example, if you see a study that comes out that says 82% of Americans are pro-choice, well, it doesn't sound quite right. You should be skeptical. And then if you read the fine print, maybe it'll say this study was conducted by, let me see, I believe NARAL is one organization that pursues issues on behalf of women and the right to choose. Okay, so perhaps when they did this study, they were asking questions like, should the woman have the right to choose to end her pregnancy taken away by politicians? So naturally, they got an 82% pro-choice response rate. Similarly, on the other hand, if you were to see another study that came out and said 82% of Americans are pro-life, you have to be skeptical of that. And if you read the fine print, maybe you'd see that that study was done by the Christian Coalition. And maybe their survey was filled with questions like, should a woman be allowed to kill her baby before it's born? And then you wouldn't be at all surprised that 82% of the people said gave the answer that indicated that they were pro-life. So, of course, there are lots of other ways to affect the results of a study other than loaded questions, but that's just one example. Okay. Obviously, it's bad to have a small sample. This is my fun question, because I always fill in the name of the celebrity, the most recent celebrity mistake maker du jour. So if you're really on top of the news in the past 24 hours, it was Michael Phelps. So for those of you who don't know, there's a picture making the rounds of Michael Phelps with a bong. So the big story is, let's see. Suppose a reporter wants to find out, would you go by serial Michael Phelps endorsed, given what he did? But the way the reporter gets to answer this question is he goes downstairs and he asks 12 people. Well, 12 people is good for getting sound bites, but it's not good for getting opinions that are reflective of the entire United States population. Now, what constitutes a big enough sample? That's something that we're going to have to. That's something that we will come to study and address later in the semester. But obviously 12 isn't big enough. Alright. Interviewer error. Another kind of mistake. When the interviewer is inappropriate in some way. What could that mean? Okay, so suppose you're at home, knock, 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 there's a knock on your door, you go open it, you see two cops in full uniform in their blues, a little badge on their uniform, and they say, we would like to know what your opinion is of the services that the police department has been providing. Do you think the police department has been doing a good job? What are you going to say? Yes. Yeah, great, super job. Keep it up. Okay, are they likely to get any no's?
Yeah.
All right. Good luck with that. I hope 911 answers when you call. Okay. No, so obviously this is an inappropriate situation. And obviously this is going to affect the responses that they get. So that's interviewer error. Okay. So here's another one. Word order or question order. Okay. So, actually, I think Kelly, it was you who mentioned before that if you put like a bunch of questions on a survey, you could sort of lead up to asking a question, and the simply by the previous questions and what they asked and how they were asked might affect the answer on the final question. Okay. So that gives you an idea that the how you ask things or the order in which you ask things can actually affect the result to a particular question.
I've taken surveys at my old school that started out, I guess there was like a main question they wanted.
Yeah.
They were trying to find out, and it started out with that, but then it went on to other things that sort of led up to the question again
Yeah.
at the end, and you wouldn't even realize it, but there were like subtle differences, and you actually wound up answering at the end differently than how you answered in the previous question.
Absolutely. Oh, okay. So this is probably someone was seeing what were the effects of these things. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, and lots of studies have been done showing that you can affect people's responses simply by the sorts of questions that you ask leading up to another question. Okay. And so that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, and that's question order. Another way to do it is word order. Let's take a look at an example of this. So let's suppose you wanted to explore the question, what do you think causes more pollution in the United States, traffic or industry? You want to get people's opinion. Well, to exaggerate the effect of what I want to show you, let me put the question this way. Do you think traffic causes more pollution or industry? Now, what's the problem with asking the question this way? What are people more likely to respond based on the way this question is phrased? People are more likely to respond traffic. Because of the way traffic is embedded as an answer, people are likely to say, yeah, traffic causes pollution. That sounds good to me. That sounds plausible, so I'm going to answer that. By the time they get to industry, they already have an answer in mind. So the effect of people choosing the first response or the first option given is quite high. I think someone did a study to this effect and found that the difference is like 5 or 10 percentage points. That's huge. The question is, what can be done about this? Now, obviously, you don't have to do it as obviously awful. The second way that I've written it down is obviously awful. But even if you write it down the first way, it turns out that there is still an effect. So the question is, what can be done about this? Well, somebody some time ago came up with a very, very, very clever solution. Say you're going to ask 1,000 people. Half of the time you ask them traffic or industry, and the other half the people you ask industry or traffic. So whatever bias effect you have for the first 500 people gets canceled out with the second 500. And you get honest results. This is called word rotation, by the way. Okay. Now the last bit that the last thing I want to talk about for today is maybe one of the most important, because it is one of the most common mistakes, but it's a very, very serious mistake. And unfortunately, it's a very, very easy mistake to make. Correlation versus causation. Survey results show that people who drive BMWs live longer. Why? Everyone always laughs. Why is that? This is true, or at least it was true when the survey was done. And this survey was done, and memory serves, this was actually part of a BMW ad campaign in, I think, the 80s, 70s or 80s, something like that. They said, according to surveys, People who drive BMWs live longer. So they went on to make statements and claims that sounded a lot like, if you want to live longer, you should buy a BMW. Is that true?
No.
No, why not? Yeah.
There's a correlation. So for wealthy people, like, you know, money, they take better care of themselves.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't say that being rich means you take better care of yourself. I'd say it makes you able to afford better care. But that's going to affect, yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah.
I was thinking maybe they would compare car and people are older now.
No, they're just comparing.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just stick with something that's very simple to measure. It's just lifespan. Okay. But wait, Madeline, is it right? Okay. But Madeline's exactly right. It's correlation versus causation. So in this case, what's really happening is correlation. And what's actually causing them to live longer? Well, everything exactly that Madeline said. What's really going on is that people who are wealthier can afford BMWs, but if they can afford BMWs, they can also afford better health insurance, they can afford better foods, they can afford to take better care of themselves. All these different things that help them live longer. So what's actually happening, is it true that people who drive BMWs live longer? Yeah, it's true. But is it the BMW that's causing them to live longer? No. So if any person were to actually go out and buy a BMW, is that going to make them live longer? Absolutely not. The car has nothing to do with it. Okay. Now, but at any rate, this is my theory. Our theory that Madeline and I have is that really it's because of the fact that BMW owners, on average, are wealthy. What if what if someone wanted to do a study to actually figure out whether or not if you drive a BMW, that helps you live longer? How could you establish that? Pretty much, yes. Not just one person. You would need a sample. And in particular, you would need to make sure that you have a sample of people driving BMWs and a sample of people driving something else, I'll say Toyotas. And then you just see what happens. Well, you know what that's called? That's an experiment. In this experiment, we have control. So notice that in the survey, we had no control over who was getting the BMW and who was getting Toyota. And on average, who gets the BMW are going to be people that are wealthier. So that affects our results. In an experiment, you have control. So, for example, you would start with 100 people, randomly select 50 people, give them BMWs. The other 50 get Toyotas. In this case, there should be, because in this case the selection is random, there's no difference between the people driving BMWs and people driving Toyotas. What's the only difference? The car they drive. So then, if the people who have BMWs live longer on average, what caused it? Car had to be the BMW. Because there's no other difference between these two populations, because we did an experiment, because we exercised control. And in this case, what would be the response variable that you're measuring? Lifespan. Exactly. Now, in this case, I tried to pick a relatively obvious example to sort of introduce us to the point. But if you if you listen to reports in the news, you hear this sort of mistake of correlation versus causation. It happens all the time. You'll hear something like, people who drink red wine live longer, so we should all drink red wine. Okay, is the red wine making people live longer? Have no idea. You have no idea until you do an experiment. Maybe there's something else. Maybe there's something about people that, one, makes them want to drink red wine, but that also makes them live longer. Does that make sense? You don't know if the red wine is causing it or if there's something else going on. Yeah, lots and lots of such studies that get reported in the news. So anytime someone says, oh, you have to do this because it'll make you healthier, live longer, you have to ask, well, the information where this is coming from, was it a correlation or was it a causation? Did the two things just happen to occur at the same time, or was one thing actually proven to cause the other? Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
There's another good example that says that people who lost their teeth live longer, and it's causation and correlation. Because there's a type of bacteria that's related to heart disease, and if you don't floss, then you're susceptible to bacteria. And people who floss also generally get better care of their health.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's a. I didn't know about that. That's a really good one. I'm going to use that. Yeah, absolutely. But notice how the causation part was probably hard to find for a while, right? The scientists actually had to go in and do some research. First, they had to establish that we take a bunch of random people, and some of them floss and some of them don't, and the people who floss live longer. And then they probably had to identify that. We said it was some sort of heart. Something related to heart disease. They said, hey, the people who aren't flossing, there's a higher incidence of heart disease. That's what's going on. And then they knew what to look for. So think about the whole process that they had to pursue scientifically in order to get down to that information. So that's a great example. Any other questions or comments? Okay.